Thank you guys all for being here today. I'd love to give you just a quick introduction about InterWorks before we get started. If this is your first time being with us on an InterWorks webinar, welcome. We are an analytics consultancy, and we've got a global presence in the US, Europe, and Australia. Many folks have heard of us through Tableau, as we're a longtime Tableau partner. Tableau has amazing analytics products, and we love helping them get our clients and folks the most out of such a powerful tool. We can also provide broader expertise. In addition to Tableau, we help customers solve and create strategies along the entire data spectrum. So that includes everything from analytics to data prep, data engineering, architecture, embedded analytics, training, and enablement. So I highly recommend you visit the InterWorks blog after this or at some point in the future, where you can dive deeper around all the technology that we support and get lots of amazing advice and tips and tricks from our entire team. Be sure to also give us a follow on LinkedIn as well if you'd like to stay in touch with all things data and continue learning with us and learning about future webinars. We're excited today to talk to you about Tableau Cloud, and more specifically, the possibility of migrating to Tableau Cloud if you are currently using the Tableau Server platform. This topic is something that has come up with so many of our customers across the board. Tableau Cloud as an offering is evolving rapidly, and as organizations are looking to evolve their technology stack, Tableau Cloud could certainly be an option. My expert colleagues, Madeline and Colby, who've just joined, will introduce themselves shortly, and they've got a ton of great information on cloud migrations. And as Vicky mentioned, be sure to take note of the Q&A function in Zoom today to drop any questions that you have, and we'll be monitoring them to do our best to address them during the presentation or maybe at the very end. So without further ado, we can go to the next slide. And I can introduce myself. I'm Sarah Dorfman. I'm an analytics architect. I've been working with InterWorks for 5.5 years, and I'm based in Los Angeles. I started my journey teaching Tableau desktop courses and then moved on to consulting around Tableau and data. And now in my current role, I specialize and advise clients in things like Tableau governance, cloud migrations. So yeah, Madeline, on to you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Good to be here with everyone today. I'm Madeline Cook. I'm an analytics consultant with InterWorks, and I'm based in Phoenix, Arizona. In my day-to-day, I help my clients make the best out of their Tableau products through dashboard design and development. And lately, I've been working lots with Colby and Sarah, along with the rest of the migration team here at InterWorks, to think about how we can support our clients with the most seamless migration experience. So really excited to be sharing these ideas with you all today, and I'll hand it over to Colby.
Thanks, Madeline. I'm Colby Owens. I've been with InterWorks for about 10 years, Tableau Server realm, about 8 of those. I'm with our Keep Watch services team, and I am going to get us started off here. So first, we're going to go over kind of what we're going to talk about today, today's agenda. We have the Tableau Cloud overview. So what is Tableau Cloud? Why should you consider it? And then we'll go on to know your limits. So that's kind of all the limitations, maybe blockers you might come across. So we're going to go through a lot of those. That's going to be a lot of my content. Reduce friction. That's one of my favorite parts of this, because this is something you can do now on your Tableau server just to clean it up, pretty much. It's just kind of house cleaning. It's also a great way to prepare for the migration. Then I'll hand it over to Madeline for planning for success. So that's kind of strategies as you plan for your migration. Ready, set, migrate. We'll talk about actually migrating and kind of expectations for that. And then cloud at last is when you're already on the cloud, what can you expect, and considerations after the migration. So the overview, actually, we'll take a poll first. We kind of want to get an assessment of where you are right now in your journey to the Tableau Cloud. So maybe you're already on it, maybe you're looking at it, maybe you don't even have Tableau Server yet, but we'll see where you are. So just take a minute to answer that poll. It should pop up, and then we'll keep going.
Cool. Looks like that's probably all the responses we'll see here, Colby. Are you seeing the poll results on your side?
Yeah, I see most people are in the right place. Unsure if we're ready to migrate to Tableau Cloud kind of won that poll. So
Yeah,
that's perfect.
cool. Lots still on Tableau Server, but wanting to migrate. So really good, good place to be.
Nice. All right, so we're gonna kind of talk about this migration in a scenario. Our scenario is kind of moving house. So moving from one location to another. Say you have a home, or you own it, or you rent it, but you have a whole house with all your stuff in it. And potentially some pressures might be on you, like you're getting too busy to just upkeep it. You've got a lot of yard work to do, which you have to maintain. You're starting to accumulate clutter, so it's getting full in there. Or maybe you have some lifestyle changes that are affecting you that this kind of doesn't work for you anymore. So just say you have your home and you're just thinking about moving, and maybe to an apartment or to a condo. So maybe smaller area plan, but it looks promising because there's modern floor plans, there's regular landscaping that's kind of done by the property management team. So they take care of all the landscaping for you. They take care of the maintenance. So you kind of have a lot of new freedom. So some benefits there maybe for your lifestyle change. So that's kind of how we're going to frame this migration. So what is Tableau Cloud? If you don't know, Tableau Cloud is fully hosted by Tableau. So they host the software as a service analytics platform. So you don't have to manage or maintain that back-end infrastructure. So there are some benefits to this. So you can see at the bottom here, there's access to the most up-to-date features and zero downtime upgrades. That's pretty promising. So zero downtime upgrades, that's pretty nice. They do upgrade whether you like it or not. So just know that it comes with some caveats, but you do get access to the most up-to-date features. They do performance tuning and scaling to accommodate the workload. So as you add more and more pressure on your Tableau Cloud site, they can handle that. They deal with that in the back end. You don't have to think about it. And then integration with other cloud-based platforms and quite a bit more. So I know it's a quick poll again, but that's kind of how we're going to frame the move from Tableau Server to Tableau Cloud. So what we want to know is what's driving you to want this change or thinking about this change. So we're going to have another poll real quick, just to kind of get an overall assessment of where your mindset is. Right, administrative overhead. That's the big one.
Yeah.
Administrative overhead. I see new functionality, frequent updates. Don't have to worry about that.
Great.
Cost and licensing. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for filling that in. All right. Well, that's awesome because the first thing we're going to talk about is administrative considerations. So right after this, but this is the part of know your limits. So administrative overhead is part of kind of the limitations as well, which I'm going to talk about. So here's know your limits. We have an entire house that's full of your stuff and you're moving to a smaller floor plan, right? So you can't really fit everything in your house into an apartment. So you're going to have to think about that limitation, among other things, and plan for that, right? So that's kind of this whole why we're having this webinar, right? Let's get an assessment, figure out the limitations and blockers, and plan for it. So here's our first one, administrative considerations. So we're going to talk about the backups and version control. So version control, I kind of already mentioned this. They are going to upgrade to the latest version, which is nice. You don't have to worry about it. You'll have access to the newest features, but you don't have a choice in the matter. If you're not ready, that's too bad. So I would just say, make sure that if you're on the cloud, make sure all of your desktop users, your content creators, are on the latest version of desktop as well, just so you don't run into version issues. And then backup considerations. So in Tableau Server, we take backups, and then we can restore those, right? If we lose something or something crashes or someone deletes a project by accident, we can restore that. Or we can restore the backup to some test server, grab the content, and then republish it. So we had some options there. That's kind of gone in Tableau Cloud. So they do take a backup of the entire environment and they keep it for 30 days, but they are not going to restore the entire environment with everybody's sites because you deleted your workbook. So you got to think about that. So not great options for backups. So just don't accidentally delete stuff. Next, we have the repository data. So in Tableau Server, what they call the repository is a Postgres database. That's where most of your stuff is stored. So a lot of your metadata, users, groups, permissions, that kind of information is stored in a Postgres database. They call it the Tableau repository. Some of you may have already enabled access and connected to it and built dashboards based on that repository data. That is gone in Tableau Cloud. You do not have access to the repository. Instead, what they've done is they've curated certain data sources based on the repository just for your site. And then they built dashboards that tell you about your site's usage, and they call that admin insights. So the good news is you have some views into that, some data on your site, and you can connect to that and create dashboards if you wanted to. So that's called admin insights. And I believe we have some links as well. We can throw some links to that in the chat for more information. So that's another administrative consideration. If you did have repository stuff built, that's kind of going to go away. We have TSM scripting. So TSM, pretty much you don't have to think about TSM anymore. If you're not sure what that is, then you're okay. But TSM is just management of the backend. So taking a backup, restoring, stopping, starting the server, taking zip logs, that kind of stuff. So if you ever had any scripts built utilizing that, they're kind of moot now. So, and the last one for administrative considerations is the URL changes. That's going to be a specific, you're just a site on Tableau's Tableau server, right? So you only have that site. So your URL is going to be something like AWS region, .online.tableau.com, and then your site name, something like that. So there's no built-in way to get some custom URL there. So that's going to be most of your administrative considerations for the change. Next, we'll have data source consideration. So on-prem data. So this is something I would say would probably cause the most impact to you during the migration, or the most benefit if you actually spent some time to change or move things. So it's your on-prem data. Tableau Cloud does not natively connect to your on-prem data. So they have Tableau Bridge, something called Tableau Bridge. It acts as a proxy. You do have to install it. Usually people install it on a virtual machine or something like that. But you install Tableau Bridge, and that has to be able to connect to your on-prem data sources, and Tableau Cloud proxies through it to refresh those extracts. So any on-prem data requires Tableau Bridge. That's what that means. I would say in preparation to, if you can, get your data live on the cloud, some cloud-based database. That would be the most beneficial. Next, we have live connections. So Tableau Cloud has a certain number of most of the large cloud-based data sources you can connect to. You're usually okay, but you should go through and make sure that if you're using any cloud-based data sources, live connections to those, just make sure Tableau Cloud can connect to them before you migrate. That would not be a good thing to find out afterwards. And then some supported source types. So this just means Tableau Cloud does not support some published connections. So for example, anything that's utilizing Kerberos authentication, it can't connect to that. So if you're utilizing that, just know the limitations of Tableau Cloud, go through what you have, and we'll have to change some of that stuff. Next, we have authentication. So group sync. If you have Active Directory set up on your Tableau server and you're kind of syncing AD groups, that kind of goes away. Tableau Cloud doesn't really have a native way to connect directly to your Active Directory. You'll have to go through like SAML and ADFS for authentication if you want to utilize, if you still want to utilize your Active Directory. But it does support SAML Skim. So, and I know this because I know that Tableau themselves have some sites on Tableau Cloud, and they're utilizing Okta with Skim. So I know it does work. And then multi-factor authentication. So MFA, that is now, as of February 1st, I think of last year, MFA became a requirement. So if any of your end users are not used to MFA, I think we all are now, but just know that that is a requirement. So when you go to Tableau Cloud, MFA will need to be set up. And then trusted tickets and connected apps. So today, Tableau's connected apps, they are optimized for embedding those views and metrics in external applications. So there's two types of connected apps you can configure. One is direct trust, and the other one is OAuth 2.0 trust. So you have a couple of different authentication. Long story short, that's just embedding something somewhere, like a visualization, and giving your end users kind of an SSO or single sign-on field to view that. And then capacity considerations. This might be one of the largest limitations for a lot of our clients, and that is a Tableau Cloud site has a 100 gigabyte limitation on the site by default. If you have more information than 100 gigabytes that need to be migrated to Tableau Cloud, you do have the option to purchase, which is another purchase, data management add-on license, and that gives you 1 terabyte. So you can increase that to 1 terabyte, and then you shouldn't have space problems anymore. And then concurrency. So this is also has to do with capacity considerations. Concurrency is 8 backgrounder hours per creator license you purchase. So say you have one creator, you purchase one creator. That means you have 8 hours that are put into a pool of hours for the backgrounders to run jobs, right? So like extract refreshes. So one creator, you can run extract refreshes for 8 hours in a 24-hour block, and then it resets. And it resets every midnight at UTC. So concurrency, if you purchase 10 creator licenses, that means you have 80 hours of pool hours. And so the backgrounders will just run 80 hours total time to run through all your jobs. That's kind of how that works. There's a few other ones like concurrency for your actual jobs. So how many can you run at a certain time? That's 10 jobs. So you can only have 10 jobs running at a certain time. If you purchase advanced management, that can go up. So there are options to increase these limitations for purchasing advanced management or data management add-on. All of your jobs have a maximum of 2 hours as well. So any of your long running jobs. So if you have an extract refresh that runs 4 hours for it to complete, it's not going to be a thing on Tableau Cloud. You'll have to figure out some way to fix that. Oh, sorry about that. One other thing that I've heard that sometimes people are surprised from are flows are treated a little differently. So flows are not included in this this backgrounder hours. Flows are completely separate, and they utilize resource blocks. So with Tableau Cloud and your site, you get one resource block. That means you can run one flow at a time. You can run all day, but only one at a time. If you need to increase concurrency for running your flows, you purchase another resource block, and then you can run 2 at a time all day. So that's how resource blocks work. And that's just for flows. And I believe we threw some comments or some links in the chat too to help support this. All right, so that's a lot of information. I kind of open the floodgates on you, but that's a lot of considerations. The holistic view here is you can't just migrate without thinking. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, a lot of considerations and limits. So after going through this, I'm actually going to throw up another poll to see what of these limitations or blockers do you think would impact you? So let's take a minute to answer that poll, and then we'll keep going. I'll put this slide back up too, so you can kind of see where things lie.
I'm excited to see what the answers are here. I think it's going to sort of guide our efforts too within InterWorks to figure out where should we be spending time thinking about how to make this process easier for our clients. And it looks like there's truly a very even spread across those primary 4 options.
Very even. Yeah, capacity's up there, data source readiness. Yeah. And that's mostly what I think we've ran into for most client migrations.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, well, good news, we can help. So we've done migrations before, we do assessments, so hit us up and we can definitely help you out. So now that we've talked about limitations, blockers, and say we're thinking about moving now, we're going to migrate to the cloud. What can I do to prepare? So this is kind of the reduce friction. How do we reduce friction? If we go back to the moving house scenario, most of the time people have a garage sale. let's get all of the clutter or things we don't need anymore. Only keep what's necessary, and let's get rid of stuff so we don't have to move it into the smaller floor plan, right? So that's kind of this scenario. So what we're going to talk about is your current Tableau Server environment and things we can look at to make this transition smoother, easier, cheaper, probably as well. So schedules. Schedules can get out of hand. A lot of times people will demand, hey, can I run this at just this time on these 3 days of the week? And you're like, well, I don't have a schedule for that. I'll create a new one. And you do that about 400 times. So this would be a great way to clean up, go through the schedules, identify what's not even used anymore, or what you can consolidate and get rid of the other ones. So schedules, that's a good way. Those are server wide, so they impact all of your sites. And then workbooks. So workbooks, again, those can easily get out of hand, especially if you have like a sandbox site or project and it's like the Wild West and you have like 400 test workbooks in there that haven't been touched in forever. Each one of those have 25 revisions behind them. So that's a lot of space. And if you can get rid of it, delete it, get it off there. The more you can go through your content and clean it up, the smoother, cheaper, faster migration will be. So, and this is the part, this is the reduced friction section. I was saying, do it now, whether you migrate or not, because it's a great house cleaning thing to do. And then data sources. So plan for the migration of on-premises data to the cloud. The more you can get off of your on-premise, if you can get everything off of on-premise databases, you can totally eliminate Tableau Bridge or the need for it if you can. So otherwise you'll have to have Tableau Bridge. That's infrastructure you will still have to manage. So that's definitely a big boost if you can do that. And then utilize hosted data sources to connect to multiple workbooks. So a lot of embedded data in your workbooks. If you publish workbooks constantly and you're embedding the same data in every single workbook, it's really hard to narrow down what is actually the same data, what's not. So if you can publish a data source and then connect all your workbooks to that published data source, it reduces the size and it eases the migration as well. So I'll move it over to Madeline. So for planning for success.
Awesome. Thanks, Colby. That was all really great stuff. We'll have a couple more links coming your way through the chat over the next few sections here. So let's talk about what it looks like to plan for migration success. If you think back to the moving analogy, there'd be no reality in which you go to sleep tonight expecting or hoping to move tomorrow to your new house, wake up the next morning, find the nearest U-Haul, load up your stuff or box up your stuff, then load it, move it. There's just too much to kind of move off the cuff. And the same is true for your Tableau Server to Tableau Cloud migration. So at InterWorks, we recommend a very thorough approach to planning your cloud migration. And today we're going to talk about 4 areas that we recommend you dedicate some extra time to considering in advance of migration. So the first area that we'll talk about is governance. Colby mentioned on the Know Your Limits section that one of the criteria for Tableau Cloud, at least in the typical deployment, is that you'll be hosting your content on a single cloud site. If today in Tableau Server, you're running a handful of different sites, maybe one for Sandbox, one for Dev, one for Prod, you'll want to think about a governance strategy in consolidating those multiple sites into a single Tableau Cloud site. Again, there are ways to get around this with the Advanced Management add-on, but a typical cloud deployment includes one site. So Debbie from InterWorks is one of our colleagues, and she has shared some really great strategies around project governance that we'll share with you, and I think we already have in the chat. One of our favorite strategies to separating content by projects is to create high-level projects for each business unit. So one for finance, one for marketing, one for sales, for example. And then underneath these projects, you might have a sandbox and a production sub-project onto which you'd apply permissions specific to who you want to see that content. So you'll want to make sure that project structure, as well as who's responsible for promoting content from sandbox to production, and ultimately the permissions around those projects, that all of that is well defined in advance of your migration. Now, also related to governance are a couple of features that might be new to you if you are currently living in an older version of Tableau Server. One of these features is collections. Collections allow you to organize your content in an easy to access list according to what's meaningful to you, not so much based on what project that content lives in. So this is a really great feature for your Tableau viewers and explorers to use to create a centralized spot for all of their favorite content. You'd consider maybe adding in some enablement around this feature as you do your server to cloud migration so that your users are aware that this is something that could really add value to their day-to-day experience in Tableau Cloud. And then certified data sources, though they've been around for some time on Tableau Server, they are also supported in Tableau Cloud. And one of our recommendations is that as you're thinking about moving content from server to cloud, and you're often doing this through, very, very close lens, making sure you're doing this methodically, this lends itself to a great opportunity to certify data sources and build confidence around the data that your users are going to be using over in Tableau Cloud. The next section we like to give extra consideration to when planning is change management. So this is easily overlooked, but really important as it relates to instilling confidence in your users once they get to the Tableau Cloud site. The complexity of a migration from Tableau Server to cloud often doesn't mean that you'll start the day in server and end the day in cloud. Depending on complexities or things that we encounter during the migration, though we try to make it, of course, as seamless and fast as possible, you do want to consider what that in-between window looks like from starting the migration to finishing the migration, and how you manage content that's been migrated somewhere in between. So if you think for a moment about your creators, if they're not aware that a workbook they own and maintain has been migrated to Tableau Cloud, and they're going back into server and publishing and iterating on the version in Tableau Server, you've created now duplicate efforts in that you'll have to migrate that piece of content again over to cloud. On the other hand, if you have a team who's in the middle of a high-pressure week who depends on a batch of reporting that sits in the sales project, for example, and that experience is somehow interrupted because they weren't anticipating that the content has been migrated, that could just evoke frustration, confusion for your users, and we want to stay away from that as much as possible for the sake of really building adoption and fast adoption of your Tableau Cloud environment. So what could be some ways to manage communication around content that's been migrated? We'll look at two ways. One is more manual, a little more involved. The other is more seamless. So we'll look at two approaches here. These are two among many, but figured this would be a good way to look at two of the options we see most frequently. So first off, if you think about that workbook in Tableau Server, you might modify it, literally publishing up a new version of that workbook once it's been migrated to cloud. You can publish to Tableau Server a new version of the workbook with a text box right over the top that tells your users this content has been migrated. It now lives in Tableau Cloud at this URL. In that way, there's no confusion or ambiguity. Your users would log into Tableau Server and be met with that message that there's now a new location for this content. But we do acknowledge that that requires an extra step on each workbook that you migrate. So there's another option that we love to use, and that is using InterWorks Curator for a seamless redirect of the URL that's being called in the backend as your users attempt to access a workbook. So if you're unfamiliar, InterWorks offers a product called Curator. We've built it, and it is our answer to a fully customizable analytics portal. And it centralizes your reporting, whether it lives in Tableau, in ThoughtSpot, ultimately acting as a centralized hub for you to access all of that reporting through the same interface. So as this relates to Tableau Cloud migrations, you'd be able to point your users through Curator to access their content, regardless of whether that content lives in Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud. The way your users would access it stays the same, and it's only from the backend that you're actually updating that URL to point to the cloud location of that content. So if you have interest in that mode of change management for your cloud migration, we'd love to share more with you about Curator. And we may have sent a link in the chat also if you're interested in that product. So just as important as change management intending to the workbooks over the course of migration, we also want to make sure that we're thinking about the data sources that we migrate, especially because we want the user experience when they first get to Tableau Cloud to be really positive and be really affirming that things are fresh there, our data is up to date. This is an advantage over the old way of, going into Tableau Server. All in all, we want it to be a really positive experience. So of course, making sure that data sources are actually refreshed and reflect the newest data once you start sending your users to cloud is super important. And you'll want to make sure that you're thinking about scheduling refreshes on your extracts well in advance of sending your users over to the cloud site. That one's a bit obvious, but in the midst of all the things you're thinking about when you migrate, that can go overlooked. And then finally, it's really important to, let's see, actually, I think we're on to the next slide, Colby. Perfect. So communication related to change management, communication is sort of a subset of this. This is much less technical in nature, but it has to do with the strategy you use for being very transparent and communicating the upgrade and the things that are happening over the course of migration to your users. So if you think about custom views and subscriptions, these are an example of a content type that would need to be rebuilt by your end users following the migration. And for many of us, it's been a minute since we built a subscription on a piece of content. The whole point is you build your subscription, it's sent to you daily, and you don't have to think about resubscribing or finding that view again. It shows up in your inbox. Well, if this is the case for your users and they're now being asked to rebuild subscriptions to their content that now lives in Tableau Cloud, it's possible they've forgotten how to do that. So we like to make sure that we're enabling our users with how-tos. These are delivered really well in the form of videos, even Slack messages, really quick things that can act as a reference for your users as they are sort of dialing in their experience over in Tableau Cloud. You might centralize these resources in an internal knowledge base so that your users know where to go to find what they need. And back to Curator, if you are using that to support your migration, Curator has a really great built-in tutorial function, which basically acts as a drop-down or this kind of subtle overlay when your users visit a piece of content that can display whatever message you want. And in the case of migrations, that could look like, hey, you want to set up a subscription to this report, here's how you would do that. So another great use case for Curator in terms of your migration. And that enablement is really core to getting ahead of any confusion or frustrations for your users. Then if we think about the exciting aspects of migrating to cloud is that we're going to have access to a handful of new features, many of which you probably didn't have in your Tableau server. It's often the case that your server is a bit out of date because there's so much more that goes into upgrading that. So we want to make sure that you're getting your users excited about new functionality over in Tableau Cloud that they'll have at their fingertips once the migration is complete. So a couple ways you can do that, send messages through whatever communication channels make sense. Maybe you're targeting your Tableau Center of Excellence and you're encouraging your Tableau developers to download the latest version of Tableau Desktop so that they can get familiar with those new features just in time for that cloud migration to finish, so that you can quickly get to reaping all of the benefits of Tableau Cloud once you've migrated. And if you have questions around how to enable your users or what resources you might be able to share, we have a wealth of resources available in our blog. We've been sending a couple links to the blog so far in the chat, but I encourage you to explore what's there. We offer webinars, and we have a really strong enablement team here at InterWorks who can also help you think about the best way to upskill your developers in maximizing Tableau Cloud. And finally, for our migration planning, let's talk about Tableau Bridge. Colby hit on this a little bit ago, but Tableau Bridge is an area that requires some special consideration if you have that on-premises data. So SQL Server, MySQL, if all of your data lives in Snowflake, Tableau Bridge is not required for your deployment of cloud. The first thing that we like to think about when it comes to whether or not Tableau Bridge will be required for your organization is, do you have access to a cloud-hosted database or data warehouse that you could move your on-premises data into? Sometimes it's the case that we see clients who have Snowflake or another cloud-hosted data warehouse, but somewhere along the lines of migrating their on-premises data into that system, the process was interrupted, not all of their sources landed in Snowflake, and now there is this Tableau Bridge dependency. The first thing we want to think about is, could we move those on-prem sources into Snowflake so that there's actually no need for Bridge at all? Sometimes that's not the case, and that's okay. That's why Tableau Bridge exists, is to connect cloud to your on-premises data. So if this is a requirement for your migration, InterWorks has built a workshop called Tableau Bridge Foundations, where we deep dive into installation, configuration, security. But for the purpose of today's webinar, we're just going to talk about a handful of things that you'll want to keep in mind if you are installing or requiring Tableau Bridge for your cloud migration. So first, you'll want to identify a virtual machine where you can install and configure your Bridge clients. Bridge right now is only available for Windows operating system, but as of Tableau 2023.3, we expect it to also be available for Linux. And only one Bridge client can be installed on a given virtual machine. We do recommend a virtual machine over a personal laptop because we don't want Bridge, which is responsible for keeping your data fresh, competing with other resources that other applications on a personal laptop are using. So a virtual machine is the ideal way to go when it comes to installing your Bridge client. And then when possible, we recommend installing a Bridge client on at least 2 virtual machines so that you can take advantage of pooling. Pooling is possible when you have at least 2 Bridge clients, and it serves the purpose of load balancing and distributing those data freshness tasks among available clients in the pool. So it gives you the best shot at data staying super fresh, and it is our recommendation that you always have at least 2 clients. And then once Bridge is installed and pooling is configured, you'll of course want to test the connections to your on-premises data. If you're looking at an extract, trigger that extract refresh. If it's a live data source that Bridge is supporting, you can of course make a change back on the data layer and make sure that you're seeing that flow through your reporting. We have a link to the first blog in a 6-part series that Sarah and I wrote together, and that will also take you into a bit of a deep dive into all things Tableau Bridge if you are interested in learning more. So before we move on here, let's take a moment to pause and reflect on these areas of planning. I'm curious to know from all of you which of these areas feels like it might be the bulkiest to plan for and the most substantial. Which of these topics really resonated with you? Kick off another poll here. Tableau Bridge right off the bat. seeing a lot of Tableau Bridge, and you're certainly not alone if you have on-prem data that you expect to keep fresh with Tableau Bridge. More often than not, we're seeing that as the case rather than someone who has all their data in a cloud-hosted environment. And then I'm seeing a good chunk of responses around governance, authentication, and scripting. That ties back into some of those considerations Colby shared with us, so that all makes sense. Cool. Bit of change management. Great, thanks for the responses there. All right. So planning is a really substantial part of your migrations, and we've covered a lot. There's other things that might apply to your unique migration. So InterWorks has a migration planning service in which we help you think about potential blockers, solution for those things so that you have a plan of action before you jump into the implementation of your migration. We don't want you to have to anticipate every blocker on your own. There are things that we have encountered by virtue of doing many of these. And so we're happy to help you in building your migration plan. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Let's go on to the migration itself. And I find this to be kind of an important topic because we talk a lot about considerations, how to plan for it, but what does a migration actually mean and how would this look in a manual sense and what can we automate? So keep in mind that the strategy we're talking through here sort of assumes you've already addressed the considerations that Colby raised and we've done our due diligence before we begin implementation. Go ahead to the next slide, please, Colby. This is what a manual migration process could look like. And don't worry, there are parts of this that can be automated. I'll also add that this is what a manual migration would look like today. Come 2023.3, this will change slightly. So we'll look at that in a minute. First step would be to publish all of those published data sources that currently sit in Tableau Server over to Tableau Cloud so that those published sources exist in both locations. Then on a workbook basis, you download that workbook and you'd evaluate the data source connections that sit inside of it. If that data is embedded, you'll want to consider, is it private network data or is it cloud-based data? The reason for that is that today, Tableau Bridge only supports keeping data fresh that exists as a published data source, which means if you had an embedded on-prem connection within your workbook, you would actually have to first publish that out as a hosted data source, reconnect your workbook to the hosted equivalent, and then publish the workbook. Colby, if you want to flip to the next slide, we anticipate this process to become easier, faster, because with 2023.3, Tableau Bridge no longer requires that you publish your embedded on-prem data sources. So that means you could download the workbook. If there's a hosted data source, you would reconnect your workbook to the version of that source that's been published to the cloud site, and you're good to go. Any of those embedded on-prem connections will be supported with this new version of Tableau Cloud. Of course, it would be a lot to do this all manually, especially with larger deployments of Tableau Server. So let's take a look at what can be automated. Perfect, thanks, Colby. So content migration tool is a really effective way to automate some of the mundane tasks surrounding content migration. Tableau CMT, as you might have heard it, can help you migrate workbooks, published data sources, project and user group permissions. It's not at this time able to support the recreation of subscriptions, custom views, data-driven alerts, or favorites following your migration. So if you have some dependencies around those unsupported items, please reach out to us. We have solutions for these things, and we'd love to help you with these more manual aspects of migration. All right, so that wraps up our migration planning, what it looks like to actually migrate. You've made it to Tableau Cloud, but you definitely don't have to get there alone. The process that we walked through today and the structure of this presentation really closely aligns with our Tableau Cloud migration solution and how we like to think about that. So if you want to jump to the next slide, Colby, I'll just share a couple notes surrounding how we view the phases of migration. First is what we call an initial advisory session. This is really a conversation. We want to hear from you. What are your goals for Tableau Cloud? What are the pain points you're trying to solve for by migrating? This is just a really easy, organic conversation that helps us understand what the right next step could be for you. During this conversation, we talk a bit about the considerations back in Colby's Know Your Limits section of this presentation, because we want to make sure that you understand at a high level what will be possible in Tableau Cloud as compared to how you're running your Tableau server today. So if you are like me, I prefer to know kind of what the substance of that conversation could look like in advance. And in the lower left corner of this screen, we do have a link to a type form, which you could fill out or just look through before contacting us to schedule your initial advisory. There's absolutely no expectation that you complete this before we have a conversation, but it does shed some light on the types of questions we love to get at during this conversation so that we are accurately explaining the migration process to you as it relates to your unique deployment. After our conversation, we like to help you with a migration plan. So this migration plan is where we really deeply explore your Tableau environment, the architecture of your data, and we identify potential issues along with solutions or recommendations for what could make sense to happen before you migrate, after you migrate, to make this the most seamless experience. By the end of the migration plan phase, you'll have a detailed roadmap to act as a plan of action as you move into the hands-on migration. We have a service for that too, and we'd love to help you implement your Tableau server to cloud migration. With all of those complexities informed and solution for in the migration plan, we can get right into the actual doing of your migration. And in this phase, we apply our knowledge of Tableau task automation. We have a really great team with expertise in this area to make this as seamless a transition for you, the administrator, you, the user, whatever role you play in Tableau. Our goal is to make the transition from server to cloud as streamlined as possible. And then following implementation, and one of the reasons why I love how we think about migrations is you'll receive a year of post-migration support from our Keep Watch team. So following implementation, we want to make sure that you have continued support for Tableau Bridge administration, questions around data strategy, governance, things that might surface after you migrate. And so it's with our experienced Keep Watch team, you'll receive that year of post-migration support. And then, of course, we have other services that we'd love to partner with you on. I'm going to actually hand it over to Sarah to wrap us up with that bit. Thanks so much, everyone.
All right, we can head on to that next slide. So thank you, Madeline and Colby. There are a myriad of other ways, like as Madeline said, at InterWorks that we can support you. So for example, if you're concerned about the number of on-prem data sources and maintaining Tableau Bridge in a possible migration, we can assist with managing those services so you don't have to through our service called Keep Watch, as she just mentioned. Colby mentioned the opportunity to reduce friction or have that garage sale. And part of the process may be identifying those workbooks that get a ton of usage that you absolutely need to keep, but they don't have the greatest performance. So we can work with you to optimize those workbooks, and we can offer training for your dashboard creators so that they will know how to create more performant and efficient workbooks moving forward. And finally, the demand for data in native applications only continues to grow, and Tableau Cloud opens up a ton of possibilities with embedded analytics. If you've got those external customers or applications where you want to include self-service analytics, and tools like Curator can help with that. So we'll go on to the next slide. We've been addressing some of our questions throughout the webinar. I really appreciate everyone's time here today. And so we're going to be sharing a survey following this webinar. We'd really appreciate your responses. If you have any other questions for Madeline, Colby, or I, Please reach out to us at our email addresses that are up on the screen. You will receive a copy, a recording of this webinar will be sent out afterwards. And we have, if you want to learn more from us, you can check out our blog. But feel free to reach out with any other questions. And thanks for attending today, everyone.